Hi, I'm Andrea Lorian, Vermont Edition producer, and I just wanted to let you know that the podcast you're about to listen to has been edited for clarity and brevity. Thanks for listening, and enjoy.
This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. February is Black History Month. It is also a perfect time to get warmed by a fire with a good book. Today, it's our annual Winter Book Show with a special focus on books to read in celebration of Black History Month. We're joined today by three Vermont book lovers. First, Kekla Magoon is an author of books for children and young adults. Her latest is called Revolution in Our Time, the Black Panther Party's Promise to the People. It's a nonfiction book that came out in 2021. Kekla, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
We are so glad to have you. And we are also joined this hour by Rajni Edens. He's a spoken word poet, an MC, and a teaching artist. And his latest books of poetry are called In the Coded Language of This Mortal Tongue, and Their Names Are Mine. Rajni, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a blessing to be here together with you all.
So glad to have you. And last but not least, we are joined by Oceana Wilson, the president of the Vermont Library Association and dean of the library over at Bennington College. Oceana, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today.
I'm very glad to be in the company of three bookworms like myself. And listeners, you can join the conversation as well. What is the best book you've read recently? Is there a book by a Black author you'd like to lift up and tell us about in honor of Black History Month? Give us a call. Our number is 800-639-2211. You can also email us, as some of you already have, to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. We're going to be compiling all our recommendations from this hour on our website after today's show. So let's kick off with an easy one. I would love to hear from each of you about one book that you have read recently, maybe the past couple months, that you have just really, really loved. No other parameters besides that. Rajni, let's start with you.
Oh, goodness. What is one that I've really enjoyed? I think one that stands out for me is The Living Wisdom of Howard Thurman. This is a text that explores the life and insights of one of the profound mentors of Martin Luther King, who I learned had an instrumental impact on Dr. King's legacy and activism, and just getting a sense for his development as a speaker, as a student of wisdom and profound contribution of spiritual practices in practical ways, serving and inspiring freedom movements and holding space for the powerful ways that people can stand for love and peace and truth and brotherhood. Such an inspirational text. So that's definitely one that stands out for me personally.
Could you tell us the name of that book again? I couldn't quite hear you when you first started.
The Living Wisdom of Howard Thurman.
The Living Wisdom of Howard Thurman. Kekla, I'm first curious if you've heard of this book, and then also what's the book on your list that you have loved recently?
I haven't, but I'm jotting it down because I always love new book recommendations. So a book that I've been reading for research is called Alone Atop the Hill, and it's an autobiography of Alice Dunnigan, who was one of the first Black journalists to cover the White House and Capitol Hill. And so I'm writing a picture book biography about her that will be published at some point in the future. But I've been reading her words and her experience of being one of the only Black journalists allowed into the press corps, and interviewing presidents and trying to get her voice, heard in that landscape. And so I'm really fascinated by her story and her life and her struggles. And I'm looking forward to translating that narrative for young readers.
You've also written a picture book relatively recently about Ketanji Brown Jackson's journey to the U.S. Supreme Court. Tell us a little bit about translating a subject or a person who works very much in the sphere of adults into a picture book form.
Yeah, it was a really fun project. I was watching her confirmation hearings and, all the dialogue leading up to her appointment to the Supreme Court with great interest, of course. And sort of the day she was confirmed, I was sitting there crossing my fingers and waiting. And, I wrote to my agent and I said, I must do a picture book biography of this amazing and powerful woman. And so I spent, a lot of time studying the news media about her. There was so much information, her background, her biography, her ethos, her life story, right? Like all of the conversations that she had with the Senate confirmation hearings, was about where is she coming from? What is her background? Like what brings her to this place and time as somebody who can be a voice for justice in our nation and one of our leaders on that front. And so I was really fascinated by the challenge of, distilling all of that narrative into, this short 32-page, a few words on each page picture book story that would appeal to young readers and help inspire them to hopefully find their own voice the way that she has found hers.
Wonderful. Rashi, if I remember correctly, and Oceana, I haven't forgotten you're there. Don't worry. But Rashi, if I remember correctly, you're a parent. Is that right? Do you have young kids?
Actually, no. My daughter is actually a middle schooler over at Edmonds.
Okay, great. Well, I'm hearing Kekla talk about translating what could seem like adult subjects for much younger readers. I'm wondering if any of that resonates with you, and if there are books that have helped guide you as a parent in introducing your own child to some of these great people in history or key moments in time.
Definitely. I think one particular text that stands out is the teen version of the autobiography of Malcolm X that I think is translated by his daughter. What is the title of that text?
Are you referring to the book that Kekla wrote? Kekla, you've written a book alongside Malcolm X's daughter. Is that right?
I did. I co-wrote X, a novel with Ilyasa Shabazz, who's one of Malcolm X's daughters, and that's one. She's done a couple of stories about her father. Another one is what is the title? That she wrote with Tiffany Jackson. There's a second book, but yeah, X is one of the novels that tells the story of Malcolm as a young boy.
Yeah, I think that is the one. Yeah, I think that it's a beautiful text and rendition just to make it more accessible. Because I know we've done some study and exploration of the film Malcolm, so seeing different renditions of his life work and making it more accessible, being able to share that and language it critical context to contemporary time, so valuable.
Let's bring in Oceana Wilson here with the Vermont Library Association and Bennington College. Well, first, Oceana, since we're discussing young adults literature right now, let's start there with you too. Are there any books on your list that would be of particular interest for children or young adults during this Black History Month?
I'm mostly stuck with adult because we're at the college level.
Let's go adults
so
then. Let's move on up. Oh, don't apologize at all. What's one book that you have read recently that you've really loved?
A book that I just finished a few weeks ago that I absolutely loved was How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. And this is, Sophia Sinclair is a poet, and this is a beautifully poetic and moving memoir about her growing up in a strict Rastafarian household in Jamaica, where her father felt that women should be obedient and pure and must be protected from the corrupting influences of outside culture. And this memoir is really about the story of the mother and daughter and their deep bonds, the whole family dynamic and their growth throughout, the shadow of colonialism interwoven across Jamaican culture. And ultimately, it's about Sinclair's journey to finding her own power and voice. It's such a visually lush book that it feels so immersive as you're reading it. And the narrative is so compelling that I really struggled between wanting to read forward to get to the next part and then really slow down and reread and absorb these very exquisitely honed sentences.
That's an ideal push and pull with a book. And,
yeah.
Apologies if you already mentioned this. I didn't quite hear you. The author is a graduate of Bennington College, too. Correct?
Yes, she is.
There you go. And you have all sent us over a list of books that we, again, will be including on our website, vermontpublic.org. We received an email from Julia in Bellows Falls about George Washington Carver. They write, "For a man who changed the face of modern agriculture, there are surprisingly few comprehensive biographies about his life. George Washington Carver seems relegated to children's books about peanuts, but the man was a monolith in scientific achievement and the struggle for Black civil rights." The book Julia recommends is called My Work is That of Conservation, an environment biography of George Washington Carver by Mark Hershey. It's one of my favorite books of all time, they write, not only as a farmer, but as a white American, continually trying to fill in the gaps of the realities of African-American struggle through our shared history. Curious, has anybody on our panel heard of this book about George Washington Carver?
No, but it sounds amazing.
Yes.
Love to check it out, though.
Yeah, we'll have to add it to our list. And this is a good excuse to talk more about biographies. Kekla, is there either a biography that you have read and really loved that illuminated somebody in Black history that was really fascinating to you? Or is there a book that you really want to write about a person that hasn't really gotten their due yet?
Yeah, well, definitely the Alice Dunnigan book that I mentioned earlier, Alone Atop the Hill, is one that is inspiring to me. Certainly the autobiography of Malcolm X is an inspiration, and I drew upon that in writing X, a novel with Ilyasa, his daughter, where we looked at, that story about his life is told from hindsight. In that story, Malcolm is, it's close to the end of his life. He knows that he's going to probably be killed soon, and he is looking back on his life and saying, okay, I became this world-renowned speaker and leader and preacher and humanitarian, but that's not where I started. I started with this activist family, and I lost sight of what I wanted to be, and I got confused, and I, sort of ran away from my roots, but then I brought myself back, and look what I became. And so it has this benefit of hindsight, where he knows who he turns out to be. But the story that Ilyasa wanted to tell in X, the novel, is about the 14-year-old kid who has no sense of that future, who can't see what he's going to become, and is having to make choices as he goes through his life. And so, that reframing is really powerful for, illuminating that none of us know what's possible for us. None of us know what's next in our lives. We might think we're small. We might think we don't have the ability to contribute on a grand scale, but, neither did Malcolm, and then he became Malcolm X, right? And so, so I think about that autobiography often, and I think about the story behind it and the person behind it. And, I'm reminded that just making the decision to be somebody who takes good action in the world is the beginning of the path to becoming a really great leader or hero or person that is revered. And so, I think we often hold up these celebrity type people as if they're special and magical and different than the rest of us. But the truth is they started out pretty ordinary like the rest of us, and they just worked really hard and, had a good idea and tried their very best. And, any of us are capable of that kind of leadership. So I think about Malcolm X a lot as an inspirational figure, and certainly the writing in the autobiography of Malcolm X is really strong. And, I read a lot of biographies of Black Panther leaders, like A Taste of Power by Elaine Brown, or...
as part of research for your most recent book?
as part of research for a revolution in our time, the Black Panther Party's Promise to the People, which is my young adult history, the nonfiction history of the Black Panther Party. I read a lot of autobiographies and biographies of the original Black Panther members to get a sense of that history and different people's perspective on the events of the 1960s and 70s.
Rajni, are there? I see on your list there's a number of biographies and autobiographies that mean something to you. Are there one or two that you'd like to highlight for us now?
Definitely. I mean, I have to echo with Sister Kekla, just that love and admiration for Malcolm's text. That I think that's a pretty formidable and pivotal, life-shifting text in the lives of all human beings as examples of crucial transformation, and particularly Black people in America in terms of gaining a certain insight and worldview and context on our power and purpose in the world, and connecting to our history, just having an offshoot to grow from, to have a certain sense of character and crucial meaning in the world. So that meant so much to me as a teen, and still. Actually, I'm reading the text with my daughter now and deconstructing it in real time because I think it's pivotal for her learning as well. But some other texts that come to mind are Crusader for Justice, which is the autobiography of Ida B. Wells, crucial, brave sister who traveled to spaces where people had been lynched and get the stories from people. She actually encouraged folks to travel away from their community when she had some friends of hers who were murdered by the whites who were insecure about Black ownership and enterprise in their area. And just having examples of people who stood up and spoke truth to power in pivotal ways. Actually, her autobiography begins with her saying the only reason she was stepping into that space was because there was a young, rising Black woman student who was curious about what her role in history had been. And she said, she knew about all these different white women examples in terms of suffrage, but she knew she had done something accomplished, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. So she said, okay, this is the reason why I offer this. So that's definitely one that stands out to me. Another one is Here I Stand by Paul Robeson, the Renaissance man, speaker of countless languages and all-American football player and just like world diplomat. He just reminds me of like the power and strength in your artistry and having a certain integrity in terms of being an artist who recognizes the pivotal role you have in offering something meaningful in what you share for the positive transformation of society and the world and for people's social uplift. So these are some of the texts that come to mind that I always return to in terms of huge inspiration, empowerment, and meaning and relevance today.
And that last one was Here I Stand by Paul Robeson. And again, we'll be collecting all of these titles on our website, vermontpublic.org. Oceana, I see a couple biographies on your list, including one about Ralph Ellison. Could you tell us about it?
Yes. Ralph Ellison, a biography by Arnold Rampersand. Probably as many people know, Ellison had extensive connections to Vermont throughout his life. And this is really, I think, a definitive biography that draws extensively on the archival research and writings of Ellison to create a really comprehensive portrait. Rampersand was really the first researcher that was given access to Ellison's papers. So I think the way in which Ellison's voice comes through is so clear and so much the driver of the narrative in this book. So it's both a very comprehensive record of his life and time and also a nuanced portrait of who he was as an artist and a creator and the sort of amazing literary world he was centered in.
Well, I think many of our listeners might not know the connections that Ralph Ellison has to Vermont. Do you mind spelling those out for us a bit more?
Oh, absolutely. Well, he really started writing Invisible Man in a barn in Waitsfield in the summer, and his first, what he attributed as his first sort of lecture at the college level happened at Bennington College, and he maintained a long relationship and was a trustee for many years here. And both he and his wife really enjoyed Vermont and being in Vermont.
Mm. Well, let's pull in some phone calls as well. We have a call coming in from Andrea in Plainfield. Andrea, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to contribute the American Haitian writer. She was born in Port-au-Prince, capital of Haiti, and I have been several times in Haiti with friends here from my central Vermont area, Marshfield and Plainfield, Bob Belenky especially. A retired child psychiatrist, and I'm a retired teacher, and I'm daily in contact with my friends in Haiti because the situation is really, really dire. And we just totally ignore it over the stresses with Gaza and Palestine and Ukraine. But it is in our neighborhood, and it is just heartbreaking. So the book I can highly recommend, and I like to read again and again, is from Edwidge Danticat, Breath, Eyes, Memory, where she describes all the memories she has and all the new experiences when she revisits Haiti, but also her memory as a child there.
Breath, Eyes, Memory by Edwidge Danticat. I also love that author. Thank you so much for calling in and telling us about that. Rajni, have you read any books by Edwidge Danticat?
I have not, but I just put it on the list. I just downloaded it just now. I'm like, okay, I have to jump on it immediately.
Yes. Yeah. He's a great writer. Raji, I know that we only get a couple more minutes with you, so I want to make sure that we get to more of your recommendations before we have to take our first break. What else is on your book list? What should our listeners be reading this February?
Well, I think February and onward, these will always be useful texts to explore and to deepen our understanding of shared humanity and the particularity in the universal and vice versa.
Yes.
So maybe I'll just go into a litany of what I have listed. And,
please.
Have that be a crucial offering with the time we have left. So I know I said Crusader for Justice. Another one that stands out is Rainbow in the Clouds, The Wisdom and Spirit of Maya Angelou. There's an upcoming release by my good friend Reagan Jackson called Still True, The Evolution of an Unexpected Journalist. A Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. The Speeches of Fannie Lou Hamer, To Tell It Like It Is. With Head and Heart by Howard Thurman, which I mentioned. May We Forever Stand, Imani Perry, on the life of the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. I Write What I Like by Steve Biko. Jimmy's Blues by James Baldwin. Remnants, A Memoir of Spirit, Activism, and Mothering by Rachel E. Harding. Afeni Shakur, Evolution of a Revolutionary by Jasmine Guy. Death of Innocence by Mamie Till Mobley, the mother of Emmett Till. Frederick Douglass, Selected Speeches and Writings. One Touch Blue, a poem book by my mother, Randy Edens. My own text, Their Names Are Mine. This is the Honey by Kwame Alexander and beloved poet Reuben Jackson. Be a Revolution by Ijoma Oluo, another good friend. Sing a Black Girl's Song, Natasake Shange. The Living Wisdom of Howard Thurman, I mentioned. Generations by Lucille Clifton. Sweat the Technique by Rakim. The Autobiography of Assata Shakur, Assata. Begin Again by Eddie S. Glaude Jr. The Three Mothers by Anna Malika Tubbs, and Cultivating Genius by Goldie Muhammad.
I'm glad you brought up This Is the Honey by Kwame Alexander, as well as Reuben Jackson, who also has some very, very deep Vermont ties. Could you tell us a little bit more about that book before we let you go?
Oh my goodness, just an amazing compilation of texts I actually learned of because Reuben Jackson is a good friend of mine, and I think they had a series of readings recently in the early part of Black History Month in Washington, D.C. Just having an opportunity to share among some of the most profound and impactful, poignant, insightful poets of the day is an amazing experience. And I think reading these texts, it's good that we're animating this and activating it in people's consciousness for the month of Black History Month. But this is for Black History, Present, and Future, and the whole bit of the human family. So these will always be useful texts to explore and peruse. Thank you so much for holding space.
Well, thank you, Rajni Edens, so much for your time today. We'll include your whole list of recommendations for this month and for beyond, as you said, on our website on vermontpublic.org. Rajni, thank you.
Thank you kindly. Take good care.
Now, our other two guests, Kekla Magoon and Oceana Wilson, are going to stick with us after this break. We will continue bringing you more book recommendations from Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Today it is our annual Winter Books Show. February is also Black History Month, so we are placing a special emphasis on books by Black authors. Our guests are Oceana Wilson, the president of the Vermont Library Association and Bennington College's library dean, and young adult author Kekla Magoon. And listeners, you can join the conversation as well. Send us your reading recommendations to Vermont Edition at vermontpublic.org or call in to 800-639-2211. We've received a couple messages from listeners on Instagram about books they have been loving recently. The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates, gorgeous conveyance of multi-layered messages, one person writes. Another Ta-Nehisi Coates recommendation is Between the World and Us, a book written by Coates as a letter to his then teenage son about his perception of what the feelings, symbolism, and realities associated with being Black in the United States are. Kekla and Oceana, have either of you read these books by Ta-Nehisi Coates?
I've read Between the World and Me.
Oh, yeah, apologies. Yeah. Let's start with you, Oceana.
Well, yes, I think we have maybe the same answer.
Yeah.
The World and Me is an incredible book, and I'm so glad it came up as a recommendation.
And Kekla?
Yeah, same. That's the one I had also read.
Yes, and Between the World and Me, excuse me, I said Between the World and Us. And we also received a recommendation called All We Can Save. It's an anthology of essays and poems by a diverse group of women working in climate-related fields in the U.S. That's called All We Can Save. As we talk about book recommendations, we are getting recommendations from you two, Oceana and Kekla, today. I'm curious where you get your recommendations from. Who are the people that you go to or the sources where you get great books to read? Kekla?
I certainly listen to my friends and I read the publications of my friends. There's one website that I love, especially during Black History Month, to find new books by Black authors, and that's the Brown Bookshelf. And they interview and promote and spotlight Black authors during the month of February. They do a 28 Days Later celebration. And so every year in February, they spotlight 28 different Black authors writing for children and young adults. And they'll look at their work. They're often trying to find debut authors, new authors to the field to spotlight. So, I had a spotlight on there about 10 years ago, which is still available. And you can see all the past years of recommendations. But the website is thebrownbookshelf.com, and they have it's a collective of young adult authors and children's authors who partnered to create the website to be a gathering place for resources and texts that celebrate the Black experience. And so they have highlighted most of the authors who've published, multiple books in children's literature are featured there, and a lot of the authors who are just publishing their first book are also featured there. So it's a wonderful place to go to find new books on all walks of life, not just Black history, but all different celebrations of Black culture and life and perspective and experience.
Nice. What a great resource.
Yeah.
And Oceana, what about you? Where do you get your book recommendations?
Yeah, similarly, certainly friends, students. I'm a fan of Bookstagram and finding things on social media. I really enjoy the Book of the Day podcast from NPR. We also Forward, which is available to libraries, which is reviews of independent publishers, is a really great source for some of the less mainstream titles that are really incredible books as well.
Let's go back to the phones. We have a call coming in from Thomas in Bethel. Thomas, you're on the air. What's your book recommendation for us?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for taking my call. My book recommendation is Ileana by Leonard Meek. He is a Vermont resident born and raised in New York City. And his book is a short fiction novel about the Second World War, and mainly about the horrors and that are being inflicted by the Nazis, and how the power of love, family and friends can help with it and overcome it. It's a really nice book. It's not too long, and it reads really easily. That's what I found.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that recommendation, especially by another author with Vermont ties. Let's go next to Penny in Lyndonville. Penny, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Penny Patch, and I'm a former member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. I'm going to recommend 2 books for starts. There are millions of them. Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement, A Radical Democratic Vision by Barbara Ransby. Miss Baker was a remarkable woman who worked for the NAACP, for Dr. King, and in the end, she was incredibly important for SNCC and our organization of young people. So you really need to learn about Miss Baker. Then the second book I will offer you is Hands on the Freedom Plow, Personal Accounts by Women in SNCC, edited by six people. The first one on the list is Faith Holsart. So that book is 52 stories of women who worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The vast majority are Black, and then there are a few white people, Hispanic people also. So, I recommend it. It's great for schools because young people can pick chapters, and read the stories. So I'll stop there.
That's great recommendations. Thank you for sharing both of them and for telling us about your own connections to SNCC. It's fascinating to hear. Kekla, I love the caller's mention of these books that are maybe not necessarily written for kids, but are great in schools to help kids learn about these moments in time.
Absolutely. Yeah, Hands on the Freedom Plow is wonderful. I don't know that particular Ella Baker biography, I don't think, but certainly Ella Baker's story is very important for young people. Yeah.
We were getting lots of emails in with recommendations. Thanks to everybody who's sending those in. We got one from James, who wrote The Blackwoods Pursuing Racial Justice on the Adirondack Frontier by Amy Godine. Beth emailed us about Big Machine by Victor LaValle, I believe, in St. Johnsbury, as well as The Sellout by Paul Beatty. And then Suzanne wrote in 2 books by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, Black Friday and Chain Gang All-Stars. Chain Gang All-Stars has been on my list for so long, and I need to read it. It's one of those books, I got it at the library, and then I had to return it before I could start it, and one of those things. But thank you so much for highlighting these books. Ocean, I'm wondering what kinds of books your students or the professors at Bennington come to you and ask about. Are there any topics or titles that seem to be bubbling to the front these days?
I think graphic novels are perennially popular, and one of the themes I've seen is Black history in music, and topics around Afrofuturism seem to be very of the moment currently and of high interest among our students and faculty.
And you have a book on your list, A Pure Solar World, Sun Ra and the Birth of Afrofuturism.
Yes, and Rajni that talked about Octavia Butler, another really important pioneer of Afrofuturism and writer. But this book explores really how Sun Ra, as a musician, brought together space music as a means to build a better future for Black Americans, and how he formed the band. But I also was sort of thought this was a compelling read because it's still sort of a living history in the sense that the Sun Ra Orchestra is still a performing band. It's led by Marshall Allen, who's a 99-year-old saxophonist and longtime member since, I think, the 50s, 1958. And they still tour extensively, including a show that was part of the Burlington Discover Jazz Festival last summer. And it's amazing, amazing show and a really incredible story. And I think that, for listeners that might already know the history, there's also books, Sun Ra was a poet, and he has a book of his poetry called The Immeasurable Equation. And just a few years ago, there was an art book that came out called Sun Ra Art on Saturn. That's the album covers, which are glorious and I think could be enjoyed by everyone. And they were created, the covers were handcrafted by Ra and his bandmates, and it's a really well-done, beautiful art book.
Wow, a 99-year-old saxophonist. That is something I need to read a book about. Let's pause here for...
You think that maybe it's like he just comes out in waves, which is what I thought when I did Burlington, but I saw another show. But no, he's on stage and performing and leading the whole thing.
Amazing.
It's amazing. And everyone should definitely check out the books.
Well, this is our annual winter book show. We have to pause for one more short break. More recommendations when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lefrak. Today, it's our annual winter book show where we hear about the best books you have read recently and create a big list of recommendations for you. This edition of our book show has a special focus on books by Black authors or books about the Black experience in honor of Black History Month this February. Our guests are Oceana Wilson, the president of the Vermont Library Association and Bennington College's library dean, and young adult author Kekla Magoon. Let's go right back to the phones here. We have Eric in Burlington with us. Eric, what is your book recommendation?
Hello?
Yep. Eric, can you hear us?
Yes. I have more of a question. I was wondering, does anybody know any books about Cassius Marcellus Clay, who was a 19th century abolitionist? He was an escaped slave, and he was the person that the 20th century boxer was named after. I was wondering if anybody knows anything about any books about him.
Great question. Books about Cassius Clay, the abolitionist. Kekla?
That's fascinating. Offhand, I can't think of a specific title that I know.
This might be your next book.
Yeah, right? I don't know offhand. I did know that, the boxer Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali was named after someone, but I don't think I've ever read a book dedicated to that history myself.
I would recommend definitely going to your public library, because I think that they could, there are 187 wonderful public libraries in Vermont, and they will definitely help you find resources and or maybe books about the topic. So it's a wonderful reason to take a trip to the library.
All right. Well, best of luck, Eric. Thank you. Let's go next to Ed, is it, in Montpelier? Ed, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. My recommendation is The Book of the Little Axe, A-X-E. It's written by Lauren Frances Shama, who is a American-born daughter of Trinidadian-born parents. And the book is a really sweeping, grand story of. It starts in the late 19th century, late 18th century, when Trinidad was a Spanish colony, and the person at the center of the story is a young woman who's a daughter of a freed black man who owns a farm in Trinidad. Though there was slavery in Trinidad, there were also freed black people who did own property. And it was at the time England was flexing its muscles in the Caribbean and was about to take over. It was about to annex Trinidad. So the farmer's neighbors all warned him that if England took over there, then he would lose his property and would most likely end up as slaves. So what he did was he sent his daughter out of the country.
I'm going to jump in here, Ed, because I want to leave some mystery for our listeners, but this sounds like a great book. Lauren Francis Sharma's Book of the Little Axe, about a journey that spans decades from Trinidad to the American West. Thank you so much for the recommendation. Oceana, I want to take a sharp left turn here, because there was a book on your list that I was really curious about that might be good just in time for Valentine's Day, called Lush Lives. Can you tell us about this one?
Yes. Lush Lives by Vermont author J. Vanessa Lyon is a phenomenal romance novel that was published last year by Roxane Gay Books. And the story is centered around the lives of two queer women working in the contemporary art and auction world. And as the love story unfolds, the women encounter and research a historical mystery related to a literary figure from the Harlem Renaissance. And I don't want to give too much more away, but I will say it's wonderful, and I think people will want to set aside a chunk of time, because it is definitely the type of book that you don't want to put down once you start.
Oh, that sounds so fun. And love to highlight a Vermont author as well. It's J. Vanessa Lyon's book, Lush Lives. In the time we have left, Kekla Magoon, what are the other books you want to make sure that we mention to our listeners during this winter book show?
Yeah. So I had mentioned a couple of books of mine.
Yeah.
Katanji is a picture book about Justice Jackson's journey to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's a good one for your young friends who might be curious about the history that's unfolding around us today, and who the people are that make the decisions at that level. I have also Revolution in Our Time, my nonfiction book for teens about the Black Panther Party. Also great for adults. It's got lots of pictures and history involved to learn a little bit about a movement that doesn't often get much attention in history class and whatnot. So those were a couple of mine that I wanted to share. I also wanted to share some books, other books by other authors, for another dose of Black history that's less talked about. Brandy Colbert wrote a book called Blackbirds in the Sky, which is about the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, and it's a really beautifully written book. It won the Boston Globe Horn Book Award for nonfiction last year or maybe the year before, and it's just a wonderful telling of the story of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that was this thriving community in the segregated South in the 1920s. 19 teens and 20s, and then there was a moment of racialized interaction between a Black man and a white woman that led to violence from a white mob that ran into this Black district of Greenwood and burned the community to the ground and caused a lot of death and destruction. And it's a story that often is left out of the history books, but really talks and illuminates a lot of the dynamics of economics and racism and whatnot that are still alive today.
And that book is also, it was, apologies for talking over you. That book is also aimed at middle grade and young adult readers too, right? Like many of your works.
It is. Yeah, like many of my works. I tend to because I write for children and young adults, I tend to highlight those books, but I do find that they read really well to an adult audience as well.
I love a young adult book.
They're
Yes.
written in a really accessible way, and they are very complete in how we tell the history. I find that often adult books assume that you come in with certain knowledge that you may or may not actually have. And so children's and young adult history tends to really break things down and really explain and contextualize things that I find illuminating for people of all ages and all backgrounds.
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Was there another book on your list? I think you were about to say one other one.
Yeah, sure. I had also just a fun picture book I wanted to shout out.
Please.
Called Jump In by Shadra Strickland, and it's another picture book. It's about jump rope. And so it's very rhythmic and fun. Shadra is an author-illustrator. And so, we spend a lot of time talking about Black history, talking about, the traumas and the struggles and the racism and the things we've overcome and the various challenges and the various heroes. But I think it's also important to highlight just the culture and the everyday, fun, joyful experiences and moments of being a Black child, being a Black member of community. And so Jump In really celebrates the positivity of just Black life.
Mm. Oh, that sounds wonderful. And thank you so much for highlighting all these books for adults, but also for kids and young adults, too. It's great to be able to create a list that we'll be putting together for our website that includes all of our listeners this month. I think we have time for maybe one more quick recommendation from you, Oceana. Is there anything we've left off your list that you'd be remiss to not mention?
Oh, I'm so glad that you're collecting all these because as you're talking, I'm like furiously
trying to write
away, and I have to stop myself to be like, "Oh, right, they're gonna post the list." Well, I'll give a shout out to a book, "Rising from the Rails: Pullman Porters and the Making of the Black Middle Class" by Larry Tye. Because this book was recommended to me during a visit to Hildene, which is the family home of Robert Todd Lincoln in Manchester, Vermont. Robert Todd Lincoln was the son of Abraham Lincoln and was the president of the Pullman Palace Car Company. And the museum actually has a 1903 Pullman railroad car, which was the mode of travel for the ultra wealthy, and what made this possible was really the labor of the Black porters, and why it was considered a good job at the time. These porters routinely faced racism from the passengers and employees, and they had extensive long periods away from their families, and the labor structure was really financially exploited the porters. I think one of the things that really struck me, I'll say...
and we only have about 15 seconds left here. Sorry.
Hildene does a great job with this history in the visit. I will say that the reason why I found this compelling was because Ty actually went to find interviewing surviving porters and their families and told the stories of those porters and hearing the voices in that real world about the oppression and also the pride they had in the work made it such a vibrant book.
And again, that's Rising from the Rails, Pullman Porters and the Making of the Black Middle Class by Larry Tye. Well, to both of our guests, thank you so much. I have so many books that I need to add to my list now. Oceana Wilson, the president of the Vermont Library Association and Bennington College's library dean, and young adult author and Vermonter Kekla Magoon. Thanks to you both.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'll close with one more recommendation from John in Craftsbury, who emailed a book called Soil, The Story of a Black Mother's Garden by Camille Dungy. They write, it's a beautiful book about the author's burgeoning garden with a focus on native plants. It served as a reminder of my privilege as a straight white male in this complex world.